balloon looked like, to say anything about what, that it was obviously a prank, but I mean, it was just this whole thing about concern about the boy and the police and all this. And I'm not trying to, of course we'd all be concerned if there were a 6-year-old trapped in that thing. But it was so obvious that that's what that was supposed to be. And it seemed to me like they were going out of their way to just quash anybody saying anything. It was at least a day or two before anybody bothered to start openly saying, well, clearly that's what that balloon was supposed to be, And I just don't understand that stigma at all. It doesn't make any sense to me. You would think that they would want to investigate that and do their jobs properly, but for whatever reason, I guess not. I was, of course, wanted to get up here first thing this morning, and life just intervenes, and I wasn't able to do that. But I missed your talk, and I was very interested in that. I have a question about something, but would you mind just summarizing what you were touching on? I see it from what I have here. You're really tapping into a very interesting strain of the whole field, too.
It could be much more developed even than I had time for. We had the AV issue, so I wanted to get back on track, so I cut part of my talk out. But I personally have never seen it. Well, I've seen some interesting things in the sky. They're close to being a UFO. In fact, one of the guys that is in the room saw it with me, and he said he made a big website thing that we saw a UFO. It was mysterious. It was strange. I wish I had more information because it wasn't behaving abnormally. It was just a cylinder kind of thing. It didn't seem to have the control surfaces. We saw it for quite a while, and I said, "Hey, Paul, look at that." After I'd seen it for a while, and then I don't know. It was. I wish I had more information, but it came down kind of like a plane would, but you could see no wings and no tail, and it should have been close enough that we should have seen that.
Right.
It was a big airliner, but without any normal features, and it was kind of fatter than it should have been. Then I thought maybe it was an airship, but it came down sort of like a plane would. It was broad daylight, and he got more excited about it because we were in his turf up in New Jersey, and he knew that there was no airfield there. He knew that was not correct.
Right.
Because there were definitely trees. There was like a little meadow, but there's trees behind it. I mean, it just didn't look like the kind of place that you had enough clearance to bring anything down. I still, to this day, I just wonder what that was. I don't know. But anyway, I digress. I've seen that, but as far as really seeing like a flying disc and really knowing that you are seeing something really bizarre, I have not had that experience. But I do bring up the fact that it was a summer night in it was the first week in September. And it was just barely had a wind to the air, but it was very hot during the day, so the macadam street was still very warm, I'm assuming. But this was like around midnight. I was going to mail a letter at the Maryfield post office, back when it was open till midnight, which it did for 40 years. Now all of a sudden they're closing at 9.
Right.
Anyway, and I wanted to get my bills paid, and I was driving down there, and I just saw this 10-foot lizard.
I don't mean to interrupt you, this is exactly what I'm talking about. I know Maryfield, I know that post
I've been
office.
down that
This
road.
is my neighborhood, right?
And there was the 10-foot lizard blocking the road, blocking my lane.
A 10-foot?
10-foot lizard, I'm telling you, it looked like, the face looked like a chameleon. It had the turret eye thing going on, and it was like a diamond shape, like from the side, the very fat kind of diamond-shaped head, not the trim head. People are like, it was a Komodo dragon. I'm like, no, it wasn't a Komodo dragon, because Komodo dragons are just, they're not the same shape. And this thing was like,
well, and we're not in South America either.
It was very weird. And then that led me to do, research on what could it have been, and then I found out it couldn't be anything, because the giant chameleon is 2.5 feet long. That's the giant chameleon, and that's it.
You're saying 10 feet?
10 feet. Yeah, I measured but see, that includes the tail too. I mean,
Still.
But people are like, oh, somebody picked something up in Mexico and brought it back, and then it got too big. Well, that's a very kind of facile kind of just way to kind of just shift it off. But it really isn't a good explanation, because it just doesn't work. For one thing, the way that it looks does not fit any known creature on Earth. I mean, for one thing, it's walking on the ground. It was doing with this lizard thing. Like, I sort of disturbed it, but it didn't want to leave the road. It was kind of going like this, like one of those lizard shaky things.
Yeah, sure.
And it was kind of low, but then it kind of stood up. And I found out later that it's very common that lizards they frequently have rib cages that actually hinge, and they actually because they want to go really low to fit under things, and go under a rock or something, and also to just get very lateral and get sun rays and heat up.
Okay.
But then when they're disturbed by something that could be, attacking them, their rib cages unhinges up like that, and they can take on a higher profile.
Right.
So I read about that, and I'm like, that is sort of what it did, because it it was so flat, and then it sort of like was disturbed, and it kind of reared up, not reared up on two legs, but I mean, it just got bigger.
Sure.
But it definitely had the hump, like the back was very much like a chameleon back, but not quite as humpy. And then it just kind of went back into the tail that was very much like an iguana. It was sort of like half chameleon and half iguana. It was very strange. And another thing, just a little tidbit here, chameleons spend their entire life in the canopy. They have grasping feet.
Right.
They don't like walking on surfaces.
Oh.
They do not like that. They spend the whole time in the canopy.
Oh.
So that's just how they live. So,
Right.
this thing would not be hanging out on the road.
Right,
It was purely a chameleon.
Right.
And I think I'm pretty sure it was a male, because it was a female, because it's very simple.
Sure.
Because in the animal world, the males have all the decoration. It was a female. It was a little tiny thing on the chin, a little thing on the head, but very subtle. It was just a very plain lizard. It was just a modeled, like, how they have, like, just generic areas of, maybe a lighter greenish brown, and a darker color. And, this is midnight, so I have the headlights on it, which tended to bleach it out. But I can still see a mottled coloring to it.
Sure.
But I have no explanation. That was down there in Eakin Park, between, my parents live in Annandale on Duncan Drive, which is the first light outside the Beltway. And people are always like, isn't this Fairfax? I'm like, well, they still have an Annandale dress, but you don't, throw a rock and it's Fairfax.
Yeah.
Well, I was staying there because they were in Europe, and I was watching their house. And, of course, always you're alone in a weird thing like that, and he goes through a 10-foot lizard. I came back, and I called the police. I said, there's a 10-foot lizard. I haven't had anything to drink or anything. I'm telling you, it's blocking the road. There's going to be an accident.
Right.
So, I don't know. You can't really do much with that. But because I saw that, it made me think, could this thing live 24 hours a day in Eakin Park? Is it big enough? And maybe it is. But there's a water source there, and, whatever. But I don't know. It just seems like this thing came out of another dimension and was just trying to make do and do the best it can. And I know it was a reptile, not amphibious, because it did not want to get in. At that time, we're talking 1990, there was standing water, and if it rained at all, remember they put the signs up, the road's closed. I don't know if you ever had to go through there like that.
Sure.
Now they've done a lot of work. There's culverts and drainage, and it's not
Dramatic
on that
improvements
border.
in a lot of places, right?
But back then it was like this standing water and these white trees that had lost all their bark.
Right.
And anyway, but yeah, I saw that and I thought, then you hear about these other cases like the Mothman situation, where it looks like a giant moth. It doesn't really fit into any known animal, but it seemed like an animal, and there were some lights in the sky associated with it. And then there's all these themes that engenders, like the Man in Black theme was prevalent there, and all this mysterious, strange phone calls, weird notes being left, singed around the edges on people's front porches, and it was just a very weird episode. So I just went to the Mothman Festival a couple weeks ago, and I was just commenting on that whole case, because a lot of people, I thought everybody knew about Mothman, but
especially after the movie, that Richard Gere movie that had come out. And,
I think a lot of people are confused that there may not have been a serious component to that, or they thought it really deviated from the real story. It didn't deviate that much. I mean, he did a pretty good job of capturing.
I've only seen bits and pieces of that movie. I never saw the whole thing before.
But as a movie, I mean, to the average person that's not even into Mothman, I think it might have been a tedious kind of watch. I mean, I liked it, but because I'm not a Mothman. But I mean, stuff's always going on in the field. I sort of take issue with the big case. I think the big cases back then became that way because there was a lot of articles written. There's a lot of attention in that way. So we think of them, and then the police get involved, and then back in the day, the Blue Book takes a look at it, and Quintanilla and all these people are making a statement, so it becomes more of a on the record kind
Gets
of
a little
thing.
more credibility, sure.
And today we don't have that, but we definitely have people experiencing cases that are just as far out, and just as happening.
Right.
This thing that my husband talked about, it was in North Carolina, but this guy saw, this big craft, and things were shooting out of it, and, beams and stuff. I mean, all this stuff's going on. And it seemed to land, but they weren't able to find any trace of it. But after that experience, he had two men in black coming, pretending to be MUFON investigators, and he let them in, and they weren't. Like when the real MUFON investigators called the next day, he was like, "You guys already came," and then no, we didn't, and it was like trying to track down these phantom visitors, So it's just the beat goes on. I think, and Cameron Pack was able in Virginia Beach to uncover this thing with a man in black element to it. Like this police officer that had the picture,
Right.
he said 2 members of CUFOS came to him. And it's like CUFOS people are laughing their butts off over that because they're like, we wouldn't have sent somebody out. We don't have any money to do
Right,
it. Back
right.
then, especially to send, dispatch someone out there to Virginia Beach because they were headquartered in Chicago. So,
Right.
So things are still going on. Mysterious things are going on. And I don't know what the deal is.
Right.
But, yeah, Man in Black, that's another topic I sort of kind of cover. I had some cases, we were just really shocked, but we've had some cases where people bring up that element. And I don't think that they know anything about the topic.
Right.
But, anyway. But, I don't know. I don't know what to make of it all. It's just very, very strange.
Well, the word biological UFO cases, that really caught my attention, and I had just heard, there's just so much research to do. I can hardly keep my notes straight half the time. The only keyword I can throw at you is rods. This whole rods phenomenon.
Yeah, I mentioned rods. I didn't even have a good slide of that, but I mentioned rods because I talked about Trevor Constable, which was a guy in the 50s and 70s, put out these books that he was able to capture with this infrared
Yes.
camera over the Mojave Desert, these large amoeboid creatures
Right.
coursing about our skies, and every now and then they become visible.
Right.
And that really captured my imagination in the 70s. I'm not saying it's a worthwhile research area, but he claims that, that there's something there and people should look at it digital copy.
Right.
Hello, this is Mr. Bob Hall. This is Dick Hall's brothers, the late great Dick Hall.
Sure.
Memorializing.
Sure.
His,
How are you? Mike Smith.
his press.
Nice to meet you.
But anyway, well, good to see you. So, are you going to check into your room, or did
Yeah,
you do that?
we hope so. I'm just gonna find out if it's available, and it's beginning to sprinkle out there, so I'd like to get my baggage in.
Yeah, sure. We can help you if you want. I better circulate back to the crowd. See what's going on.
Sure. I'll just say, I'm trying to do the show locally.
Okay.
And one of the things that made me very interested in talking with you was that you were local. Like I said, that local element was a big thing. And I won't bore you with a big explanation of who I've interviewed so far and other guests in the station that we're trying to get on and all this. But I would love to have the opportunity to speak to either of you sort of every now and then if I've got something interesting or an interesting guest, and have you kind of come in and make a comment, whether it be in studio or even just by phone or something.
Okay.
So I really appreciate the time and everything. And,
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah.
But you want me to get Rob now?
Sure, if he's got time,
Okay,
I'll be happy to wait for him.
Let's see if I can locate you.
Thanks very much.
Okay.